All right, we'll call to motion or call to order, excuse me, the pre-meeting for the West Jordan Planning Commission, August 15th, 2023. We have Commissioner Quinney and Commissioner Shelton absent, though I expect both will arrive. I know Commissioner Quinney reached out to me and won't be here until the actual meeting. But we'll go ahead and jump in. So looking over the agenda, we have the minutes. Are there any questions, comments, concerns on minutes? Okay, and on the public hearing, something that Duncan's been working on and we've talked a few times. We have the script that's up on the screen that you can see, and and you've got printed in front. Yes. But the idea here is for us to hone in on exactly what the Planning Commission's responsibilities are related to the applications. We only have one in this particular today to talk about. Duncan, do we want to talk a little bit about how this was set up, or jump into the agenda item with this as a preamble and then go out, which would make more sense?
Yeah, I'd recommend you just go ahead and talk about the agenda item, and then I can do the training. So,
okay. So I'll just, hopefully you've all read this. You can follow along. Training. This is part of the training. It's also the agenda item. Okay. So I'm just going to read the second paragraph, I think, to that and the pre-meeting portion, right? So the application that we're talking about has specific issues regarding an internal private street system, 2 connections to public streets, and an emergency turnaround. There are also some shared access driveways. So the Planning Commission should be specifically looking at those issues related to the development. It's on the page, Planning Commission script for subdivision plat applications, second paragraph. And that'll help us hone in a little bit more on the conversation and the questions. To that end, are there any questions for staff related to this agenda item?
Microphone.
You can turn the microphone on.
I would like to know what exactly is the zone R320 is.
So an R320 zone is a multifamily zone, but it also allows single family because so R3 means that they can have up to a triplex but for the cap and grade ordinance or the balanced housing ordinance.
Okay, I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
And 20 units.
So what does the three?
That means
three
means it's a multifamily. They
Okay.
can have a triplex.
All right, I
Yeah,
tried to
that-
look this up, by the way, and
Yeah.
I just couldn't find anything. So
But in that zone, single family dwellings are also allowed with a minimum lot size of 4,000 square feet. So the 20 means that you could not have more than 20 dwelling units per acre, which this development tonight is far below that at 6. So that's what the acronym means. Is residential up to a 3-family dwelling and no more than 20 units the acre.
okay, all right. When we do the subdivision for 46 lots,
Mhm.
doesn't that mean there's going to be 46 units?
Yeah, 46, but they're all single family.
And because there's single family, you can have more than 30 in this zone?
No, the minimum lots area is 4,000 square feet. So as long as each lot has 4,000 square feet, they can build a single family home on it.
Okay, so the intention is a single family home. Okay, that's fine. I just,
Yeah.
I was confused as to what, because I read that zone 3 was multifamily, and then I thought, well, but these look like
Yeah,
single family, so I just wanted to clarify that.
And what prohibits the building of multifamily is it has to meet one of the exemptions in the balanced housing ordinance. Okay, and you're probably not familiar with that being a new commissioner. At one time, this property was zoned R320 with a senior housing overlay.
Right, I know that.
That was removed last year. And let me back up, the senior housing overlay would have allowed a multifamily construction. But since it was rezoned, all they can build now is single family.
Since the senior housing overlay was
removed.
removed,
Mhm.
all they could build is a single family,
All they can build now is single family, yes.
even though the zoning is still R320.
Yes, the underlying zoning didn't change. It was just the overlay of the senior housing that was taken off.
Okay.
Any other questions on this application? Okay, I have not a question, but a comment. That was when going through the background memo, it stopped right at the end of page 4, and then we had a blank page 5. I wasn't sure if it had actually finished at that point in time. Usually I see a conclusions and attachments at the end.
That was the end of it.
That's what I figured. I don't know if we can put end of document or
Yeah.
just something odd like that.
Okay.
But I think that's it. So Duncan, time is yours.
Okay, sounds good. So part of what I wanted to train on today is just, well, on subdivision plat applications where the preliminary plat approvals come to you. And because it's good to go through different types of applications, especially on a meeting like this where we have more time. And then I think it's helpful too, as we interface with and talk to the public, because they're not as used to seeing an application in these individual types of applications, and they're not sure how they work. And so obviously a lot of what we're doing in the process of going through the training is, and I came up with a starting point for these scripts, right, for subdivision and site plan application or scripts of how we explain during the pre-meeting and the regular meeting to the public. Obviously, I tend to have probably a little bit too much technical jargon, and I think we can simplify it a little. This being a starting point, I think we could probably make it shorter. But I wanted to kind of talk to you about just a few examples of subdivision applications that prior cities I've worked at or seen, because I think there's a lot of confusion in the public about with subdivision applications, what the purpose of the public hearing is. There's some cities that don't even have a public hearing. It used to be required in state code, and then it was taken out. Personally, I think it's a great practice, right? Because public hearings are all about giving information to the public and then receiving information back from the public. And it's just that sometimes I think the public gets confused on the purpose for that exchange of information. Most of us, in life, when we're exchanging information, we think logically it's for the purpose of approving or denying or making a choice to do something or not doing it. In the instance of a subdivision application, obviously it's different, and its purpose is more to collect information to make sure that not only you as the decision makers, the planning commission, have the information you need, but also that the applicant has the information he or she needs, right? Maybe the application might change a little based upon additional information that the applicant receives through the process. Having said that, in a city with our size, with the level of staff that we have, high degree of expertise, it's not likely that an application would ever come to you that you couldn't approve, right? Because it's been screened long before it got here. But it is possible that from time to time, there might be an additional piece of information that comes up during the meeting that maybe somehow didn't get fully taken into account, just because it was never introduced to staff or whatever. So I wanted to give you a couple of experiences I've had. Probably one of the best planning commissions meetings I ever went to, and I can't remember what role I was serving, if I was serving as a acting city attorney for the meeting or if I was there on behalf of a private client, but I went to Harrisville years and years ago, and it was about a small subdivision, probably just 12 lots, and some issues came up during the meeting as people came to the podium, and one says, you know, do you realize there's an abandoned water line that runs across the property from here to here? And it cuts right through the middle of lots 3, 4, and 5. And the developer, the applicant said, oh, I didn't know about that. And the person at the podium giving the public comment says, well, yeah, and I can give you the name of the person who used to run that private system, and you can call him to make sure or whatever. And he says, yeah, we'll do that. Let's meet afterwards. And then somebody else came to the podium and they talked about a natural spring. And they says, you know, do you realize that there's a natural spring that bubbles up every year, and it's literally right in the middle of lot 8 or whatever? And, you know, somebody probably doesn't want that in their basement or crawl space, right? And so then the applicant ended up changing his lot line, so it was right in between 2 lots, right? And then another thing came up that like another lot was where all the stormwater went after a storm. So one dude's lot was just going to be, you know, entirely underwater. And I think they had a storm pond in this, and so that was configured somewhere else in the subdivision. But if that was the low spot, they just moved the storm pond collection pond there and moved the lot over, so it wouldn't be all converging on one person's lot. It would go to the storm pond or whatever. And so at any rate, I watched that process. And granted, it was a smaller city. They didn't have as much expertise, staff and so forth. But it wasn't so much about expertise as just things that only people that lived there would know. They weren't immediately obvious, right? Because nobody would know that there's this abandoned line underground. It wasn't, you know, the rain season, so nobody'd know about the storm water if they didn't live there. Nobody would know about any of those things. And so the end result was better because he came back to a subsequent meeting with all those changes made, and it was approved. And it wasn't about whether it was, you know, going to be approved ultimately or not. It was about, is there all the right information so that the applicant is making a fully informed decision of here's what I'm presenting and why. And is the planning commission understanding what they're voting on, and does it meet all the requirements, and are there no remaining issues? And I just thought it was a great process. And part of it was everybody understood, you know, what was going on and why. And then another one
Can I
was,
just ask a
yeah, go
question?
ahead.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good.
Where does it cross the line, listening to public clamor or not listening to public clamor? I'm thinking of the meeting we had a few weeks ago where the public was very opposed to the subdivision or the development. But we as a planning commission have such strict criteria that we can't really, we can acknowledge their concerns, but we can't base our decision on their concerns because
Right.
our criteria is so strict. So it's great to learn about, the water line and the spring and that, because that's helpful. But when the public clamor is, it's just going to be noisy, or we don't want that there because it's got too high of a roof or whatever it is. How do you avoid being swayed by that?
No, that's a great comment. And because what I was painting with that first example is what's optimal, right? If everybody understands what the process is about, and even the public got it. And I think the reason the public got it in that instance was the planning commission chair explained it. And I just think from week to week it was, and they did have some kind of a script, I think, and thinking back to it. So that's, I think, the reason to come up with the scripts is what is that key information that the public needs to know of? Here's the scope of the meeting. Here's the scope of the discussion. Here's what's relevant. Here's what isn't, and try to make it concise so that in a few sentences, the public can realize, oh, this is a site plan. This is what's relevant. This is what isn't. The staff has already worked on the issues of parking and lighting and minimum area requirements or access and
Can I make a
frontage.
comment?
Yeah.
In the planning commission meeting we were talking about, where I voted no on the development, if there was really nothing that we could do, why are we inviting the public to come and comment if we can't listen to them? I mean, what issue would they have brought up about this specific project? I mean, why invite them if there is nothing that can be said?
There's a good question, and it's not that there's nothing that they can comment on. It's just, it's the scope of what we, what the planning commission needs to make their decision. And I mean, in a perfect world, because we can't anticipate what questions people are going to have and what they do understand and don't. But, in a perfect world, maybe we would have already had a list of things to show on the screen: parking, code section, minimum requirement. They've got that number. Area requirement, this amount. Here's what they have. They meet that number. And then just had a chart, right? Because, and that's in the staff report. I mean, it's more of a narrative than it is a chart of showing issue, code section, minimum requirement, and here's the number that meets that minimum
So
requirement.
we wouldn't be able to question.
Yeah. Yeah, that air conditioning makes it tough. So,
I mean, because I used criteria B, whatever that was. It was about traffic, that I didn't think that the roads could carry the traffic. And, so that's why I protested against it.
right.
And, so I don't know that was inappropriate, or, if that was
Right.
not going along with the restricted. Are we to believe and 100% in what the city comes up with and says that, oh, it's okay, the traffic's fine, it's gonna be
So-
able to handle it?
That's a good question. Here's how I'd answer that, is that the criteria are simply a way to, for purposes of a site plan, or just a way to put the staff report together and make sure all the issues are covered. What really matters on a site plan, or for a subdivision, is that the criteria in the ordinance are met. So, and most of them are numerical criteria, right? And so if somebody would have noticed in the public, hey, I've noticed in the staff report, I noticed in your discussion that there's this numerical requirement, but I don't think it's been met, because I went out and measured it myself, and I think it's short of the requirement. At that point, that's super relevant, right? Because if somehow, or, I noticed that one of the city planners identified X as the requirement, but this is really this zone or this type of use. I really think Y is the minimum requirement, and they don't meet Y. So if somebody can point chapter and verse to a code section to a numerical requirement, and then show that it hasn't been met, then that becomes the point of discussion. Even though so the criteria are not really the most relevant things when it comes to subdivision and site plan. The most relevant thing is, what does it say in city code? What's the number? Is it the right number? And was that number met? And then if so, then that's the point of the discussion, right? Is to focus on, oh yeah, so is X the minimum number, or is Y the minimum number? And did they meet that numerical requirement or not? That's kind of the difference between a subdivision or site plan versus like a conditional use permit, where you're identifying detrimental effects and then imposing potential conditions, where that's more of a discretionary process. That's slightly discretionary, but when it comes to subdivision and site plan, it's all about meeting the city code requirements, especially.
All right, so in the
numerical
files for
requirements.
that project is a complete transportation or traffic report
Mhm.
in the files. We don't get that, we just get it in narrative. Is that what you're saying?
Usually that's available, right, Larry?
What about, if that's available, then maybe on some of these projects, we need that, because one of the biggest issues in the city, that people are concerned about is if we can handle the traffic that's coming. And, people complain even on this, here, I've heard people complain about how long it takes to get down the street. But I don't know, maybe we want to include traffic sometimes, more thorough report on that. And also, I'm just going to add right now, even though we're not talking about it, is water. Is there some kind of certificate that the water department or somebody, prints out, it's in the file that they have a certificate saying we can provide water for this
Yeah,
development?
it's a will serve letter, right? And Nate can probably speak to that we do require for
And
each
if there is a
development.
will serve, I really would like to see that included in the report.
All right. And then another example that I had from a city I worked in was in Marriott Slaterville. They were a fairly new city. Somebody came in with in fact, the somebody that came in with it was one of the 7 planning commission members, came in with a 5-lot subdivision application. And right away, the part-time staff that we had noticed that the area requirements and frontage requirements were not met by one of the 5 lots. And the applicant said, well, that's because there's not quite enough space, and so staff said, well, can you just make it a 4-lot subdivision? Then you meet all the criteria of city code. He says, no, I really want to do a 5-lot. And so staff couldn't talk him out of it. So it went in front of the planning commission. And I was particularly interested because 3 of this other 6 planning commission members were lifelong friends of his for like 40 plus years. And I, and they'd been trained and so forth. But at any rate, they listened carefully, and the planning commission went through the same analysis as the staff and says, you're a little short on this 1 lot. You realize we're not the Board of Adjustment. We can't grant a variance. We're not the city council. We can't change the city code for your application. We can only recommend change for a future application. And then they says, do you want to change your application so it complies and do 4 lots instead of 5? And he says, no. So I just want you to vote on it. And so somebody made a motion to deny, and it failed 6-0. So even his 3 lifelong friends voted against it. And I think he did come back a couple of years later with a 4-lot subdivision that it passed, right? Because it met all the criteria. But the point being is, rarely, if ever, should an application for a subdivision or site plan be denied, because if there's a numerical criteria or whatever that they don't meet, then you give them the opportunity to change it so it does meet the ordinance, and then you can approve it at that point, right? Another quick story is in Perry. When I worked there, they had a smaller subdivision, but there was an open irrigation ditch right along the one side of the subdivision. Fortunately, we had a city code provision that said that as a condition of development, then whoever the applicant was had to pipe that ditch. And that's what the irrigation company wanted too. And but because we could point chapter and verse to a code section, it worked out. I think even if you look at an exaction analysis where we've talked about it before, but for them putting in the subdivision, we wouldn't need the pipe ditch and so forth. And it's a bona fide health and safety issue. But so I think part of that was that we had a specific provision in state or in our city code, right, that we could point to. And then that's pretty much it, I think. But really the purpose of these processes, including the public hearings for subdivisions and site plans, it's not for purposes of accepting or denying, it's more for a purpose of making sure all the relevant information is taken into account by the applicant and by the land use authority, which is you, the planning commission. So the other thought was, we understand that that's the way things work in Utah land use law, but then how do we put together some basic information? Because not everybody's going to look at the full staff report, and if we add the links with additional information, not everybody's going to access that information online, right? Some people are just going to come to the meeting, they'll get the letter in the mail. So the idea is, as one additional mechanism to inform the public, we're focused on these scripts, right, that we can read during the pre-meeting or during the main meeting. So at least people understand the basic rules. We take it for granted, but it was kind of like years ago when I watched my nephew play rugby, and I'd never watched rugby before. I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. And until somebody explained the rules to me, it just didn't make sense. And most of the time we tend to analogize and say, well, it's kind of like this or it's kind of like that. And then in life, it really isn't always kind of like what we think it is, right? But my analogy for subdivisions and site plans and a lot of our administrative applications, other than CUPs, they're a little different, is kind of like, basketball. Like years ago, I watched the Jazz at the Salt Palace, ages ago, and there was no 3-point rule then, right? So Kareem Abdul-Jabbar comes and he shoots what nowadays would be a 3-point shot against the Jazz. But guess what? He only gets 2 points because that's what the rule was then, right? And even if somebody was like super impressed, I'm like, whoa, he should get 3 points for that. He doesn't get 3 points because that's not the rule, right? Nowadays, it's the rule that was set in advance. And if a guy shoots behind that line, doesn't put his foot on it, he gets 3 points. And so that's the analogy that sometimes I think the public doesn't get, is that when somebody comes in front of you, you can only act upon the rules that are in effect on that date, or traffic plan, or whatever the materials are, but you've got to act on what's in place and in front of you at that time. And it's anything that's not in the rules or not in the record, you can't really take into account. And for some people, they might not think that's fair, but it's no different than a game of basketball, right? The rules and everything in place, that's what we use. So at any rate, that's kind of what I thought moving forward is, I mean, like I say, I just threw out a starting point for some proposed scripts. If I would assume that as planning commission members, you'd get with your chair, Alan here, and then he can work with Larry and I, and we can change these scripts however you want. But it's just a way to inform the public, right? And because some people literally in their entire lifetimes might come to one hearing for one subdivision, one site plan. And is there a way to give somebody that a quick understanding of what the basic ground rules are? So anyway, that's all I had. Thanks.
Thank you. So to that end, this hasn't been sent out to everybody, right?
No, I think I just handed them out to you this evening, the paper version, but we can certainly, Julie could forward the digital version to you if you want her to.
Let's do that, forward it out to everybody. And then if you have comments, suggestions, one comment that I had just reviewing it is I think it's perhaps too long. It's not going to capture the attention span of a lot of folks. Maybe that's the wrong way to say it. There's a lot of jargon in here. It's easy to zone out.
That's what my wife accuses me of, always taking too long to say something. And my response is, why say something in 20 words when 200 would work just fine. But I realize that's a weakness, but
so it's a great starting point, but I'd like to get everybody's input. And the idea is there's a bit here that we'd read at the pre-meeting that focuses in on the conversation at hand, and then on the main meeting that is for the public's benefit, that says these are specifically the issues we might be looking at as part of this, and hopefully focus that conversation a little bit better. We are ready to start the meeting unless there are questions. Commissioner Shelton.
Could I just make one wrapping up comment before we start the regular meeting? The Welby West development, when the zoning change happened and we voted on that as a planning commission, it was a 3-3 split vote. But when it came back for the preliminary subdivision plat, it was a 6 or 7-0 vote in favor of that subdivision plat. And even though I'm personally against that development, I voted for the subdivision plat because it followed all of the rules in code that the city had laid out. And I think that's kind of what we're looking at. That sometimes we can vote in a when we're looking at just rules, and other times we're voting based on how we feel a project's going to affect the community.
Fair statement.
What I would sum that up is that in some situations, you're recommending to the council to make the rules or change the rules, which you were on the zone change, which is much more discretionary versus implementing the rules that are already in place for an administrative application.
All right, thank you. Oh, Commissioner Wynn.
Before we finish this discussion, I have to wonder now if we are doing the public a disservice by inviting them to this meeting with them potentially having the belief that their opinions are going to be meaningful. And so I like the approach here. I like that we're trying to be proactive about what prerogatives the public has and what prerogatives the commission has. But in the case of the public, my impression is that many of them show up thinking that they're going to have a meaningful voice here, and they don't. I don't know how to mitigate against that, how to change it, but I feel bad if people are showing up thinking that their input is going to be meaningful when in reality it's not.
Commissioner Quinn.
Since we're all weighing in, I would have to disagree. 9 years has taught me that while they may come and share their opinions with us, and it doesn't affect our ability to make a decision, because we're making decisions based on facts, not on public input, it does have an effect on the city council, who will read the testimony of people who may not be able to attend at a later meeting when the city council is hearing this. I can think of one time, I think a couple of you are here with me still, that property at 9400 South, just off of Redwood, that was going to be rezoned, and nearly the entire city of South Jordan showed up, right? That property is still, to my knowledge, is still empty. That was an example of them coming and having an input. And while we had to that night follow the rule and the plan that was laid out before us because it did meet the criteria, nothing happened. Or I think we've heard it at least one time since, right? The public may not be able to see a direct action tonight for our decision, but they will have an input based on the minutes, which I know the city council values. And then they can come back a second time if they have the ability, but at least they have 2 bites at the apple for each of these agenda items to have their voice and their opinion heard. So I do think that there's value in having the members of the public here, even if it doesn't necessarily affect our decision tonight.
I would
I'd like
absolutely
to-
agree with them.
Yeah, keeping in mind that some of those decisions you are the final decision maker on, but you're talking more about the ones that do go to the council as far as zone changes, code text amendments, those kind of things. They do have 2 bites, the apple development plans, that kind of thing.
So it is time for us to start the meeting. What I'd like to do is, Julie, on the pre-meeting for next week, can we add a letter for further discussion on this item? Just to remember it. All right, we will call to order the West Jordan Planning Commission meeting for August 15th, 2023. All commissioners are present. We appreciate those who may be online or in the audience that allowed us a couple of minutes of discussion before jumping into the meeting. But item number 1, to approve the minutes from August 1st, 2023. Commissioner Hatch,
I will go ahead and make a motion to approve.
Commissioner Wynn,
I second that motion.
further discussion on the minutes, or on the motion, excuse me. We've got a motion from Commissioner Hatch, a second by Commissioner Wynn. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Second item of the evening is a public hearing of final action by the Planning Commission for the Highlands Landing Residential Subdivision at 5490 West Highlands Loop Road. It's a preliminary subdivision plat of 46 lots on 7.26 acres, an R320 zone. Peterson Development Company, LLC, Victor Barnes applicant, Larry Gardner, Nathan Nelson as representing the city. We will invite the applicant to come forward and provide a brief explanation. If you just share your name and feel free to present your application, then staff will have an opportunity thereafter. Button on the right.
Thank you. I am Kaylin Nichols. I am representing Peterson Development tonight. You guys have seen this plan generally before when we came for rezone. It has not changed a whole lot since then, other than the access points. We have had to adjust the access points because of spacing from the different road intersections. So that's really all that has changed with this concept. The number of units is about the same. The smallest unit we have is 4,000 square feet, and they go up to 6,500 square feet. They are single family units. They are shared access on a driveway, and the road down the center is a private drive. That is because we couldn't get two access points onto 5490. And so we had to access the west private lane. And because we're accessing a private lane, we had to make the road private. So that's the reason for not having a public street through here. We have 46 lots. The homes themselves will range from 1,500 square feet to 2,400 square feet. So they're more on the affordable side of things, which that's what our aim is, to provide another product that more people can reach. So if you have any questions for me.
I've got one, and then we can, of course, open it up to the rest of the commission. Just in between lots 114, 15, that northwestern corner, I see the easement for the access to the lots themselves and a little bit more of a crosshatch to the west. Is that an emergency access or escape, I'm gonna say, onto that?
Yes, there will be bollards placed. You can see the change in the hatches between those two spaces. There will be bollards placed right there, and fire will have access to the key that unlocks those bollards. So we didn't want anybody parking there, so we put it closer into the end of the drive.
Wonderful. Commissioner Hatch?
Thank you. So the cross hatches, those are, is the entire road surface area in here private?
Yes.
So
yes.
even the main drag going through is private? Okay,
Yeah.
that was just my question. Thank you.
Yes.
Commissioner Shelton?
I'm not seeing any guest parking in this development. Can you talk about that or address that?
Yeah, absolutely. So each of these homes has a 2-car garage. And based on my last plan that I've received, we are trying to push every driveway to that 22-foot mark so that we can have 2 parking spots in their driveway themselves, not in the alley. I think we have achieved that 90% of the lots in here. It's a little tight trying to squeeze them down, but that's our end goal, is to make sure that that 22-foot driveway is accessible in each home. We also have enough width in a majority of these lots, not the interior lots that are 4,000 square feet, but the ones to the west and the east of those, that there could be a 3rd car garage or an RV pad placed in there too. And that's kind of our intent, is to allow another parking space for guests within each lot where possible.
Our city council will hold you to the 22 feet.
Yes, we know this.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hatch?
So my question then, if these are shared driveways and each driveway has 2 slots, so you're saying the driveway is 4 cars wide?
So the-
Help me, I mean, I live in a shared driveway space, so we have 2-car garages,
Mhm.
but our pullout is single. So when people park in the driveway, nobody can go in or out.
It would be two spaces behind that too.
Okay, so if you've got,
You would
2
have 4
homes.
cars if you could.
okay, but if you've got 2 homes sharing and yet somebody has a party, then the other homeowner either has to be fine with everyone parking in the driveway, or there has to be street parking available.
Yeah, there will be street parking available. I know it's really tight in this kind of a community. You are allowing 2 guests in your driveway. If you're sharing a home, a 1,500 square foot home with more than 1 family, it's going to be tight. But they will share an alley that will not have parking allowed in the alley itself,
That makes sense.
but in the driveways to
Okay,
the
that
homes.
makes
Yeah.
sense. Thank you.
Any further questions? All right, we appreciate your time. We'll call you back up if there's anything else that comes up.
Thank you so much.
All right, Larry?
Thank you, commissioners. Kevin did a good job of explaining what Peterson has been through as far as the rezone, removing the senior housing overlay on this property. The proximity of this property on 5490 West and Highlands Loop Road. Originally, it was a one-time plan to be a senior apartment building, but they removed the senior housing overlays to accommodate a single-family dwelling product that will be open to all age groups. Because the senior housing overlay prohibits those products to those 55 and older, or at least that's the intent of the ordinance. To the south of this is, and to the west, south and west of this project that's hatched in red is commercial development along 7800 South and 5600 West. To the north is much the same office commercial project or development in the future. Right now, it's just a vacant field, but that is what it's zoned to be. To the east is large lot, low density, single family dwellings. None of those homes have direct access, at least in this portion of 5490, have direct access onto 5490. Their access would be farther to the east on those subdivision roads. As you can see, and so all of the traffic in to this Highland Landing residential will come from 7800 South or from Highlands Loop Road, as the collector streets which do lead to the arterial streets of 5600 West and 7800 South. It should be noted that 7800 South and 5490 is intended to become a roundabout in the future, correct, Nate? Don't ask me when, but it is on the transportation plan to be a roundabout in that area. The zoning and land use, as you can see, is high density residential. That is the land use. And the zoning is R320 that Commissioner Richardson asked about in the pre-meeting. So the R means residential, the 3 means it could be up to a triplex multifamily and 20 units to the acre. Highlands Landing residential is much, much less than that at I believe 6.7 or 6.1 units to the acre. They will all be single family homes, as you can see on the subdivision plot. 46 single family homes. If you look at the plot, you can see where the access points are. The most southern access would come off a private street. And let me back up and say all the streets in Highland Landing residential in the interior of the subdivision are private streets, but the southernmost access would come off a private street with which feeds not only this residential development, but the commercial development. And then the one to the east would be off of 5490. There's good circulation around the development, but no lot accesses directly onto a public street. They all access onto the private street. And as Kaylin explained, the hatched portions between the lots are all private driveways, and they all meet fire code. They're the minimum width for the fire department, and they do not exceed the length. And as the planning commission pointed out, between lots 114 and 15 is an emergency access, which also provides a good point of where those residents can take their garbage cans out onto the private street to be collected. This is kind of a more blown up view of the plot. The roads, the other thing that the planning commission will be approving is the private streets. That's our code requirement. The backbone road, going north and south is 40 feet, and then the roads coming in, the private roads coming into the development are 30 feet. So that does offer some opportunity for on-street parking. The I think this probably can explain a little bit more the two. Now, West Jordan City Code only requires for a single family dwelling 2 parking spaces. All of these homes will have a 2-car garage, which meets the minimum. But as Kaylin said, they will also have 2 parking spaces in the driveway. To describe this a little more, if you look at the Hatch driveway, the Hatch driveway to the driveways, that's wonderful to say, the Hatch road to the driveways, the driveways will be at a right angle to that Hatch road. Okay, and so I think that there may have been some confusion on the way the driveways work. This also is a good example of the mix of lot sizes within each of these private roads. There's some larger lots, and then some, as you can see, 141, 138 are the minimum lot sizes in the R320 zone of 4,000 feet. All of the lots in the R320, the minimum lot size is 4,000 square feet, and all of the lots are at least 4,000 square feet and up, and I put an average in your staff report. And this is just an illustration of what the private roads will look like. The 40-foot road, as you can see, will have sidewalk on both sides, and the 30-foot road will have no sidewalk. I think there is a sidewalk actually on an easement coming into the development. If you look to the very left side, that is street light placement. The street lights meet our minimum standards. I think they exceed the minimum standards, so I think there'll be good lighting in the development. The middle slide shows waste can placement. What is anticipated where people will put their garbage cans now. The HOA, the Homeowners Association of Highlands Landing Residential, will be required to pay for garbage pickup because it's on a private street. The HOA, as many HOAs do, can contract with the same city developer, Ace Disposal, to go onto that private street and pick up the garbage cans. But you can see all of the cans will be placed upon the private street and none on 5490. The far right slide shows the drainage. The drainage is from north to south, hopefully down the middle road to the detention pond at the very, very far south of the development. Then it will be metered into the city system, or that middle road, it can drain to the storm drain conveyance on 5490 west. Landscaping, the exterior roads, 5490 and Highlands Loop Road are public roads and have a different tree planting standards. They need a tree 1 per 25 feet. And as you can see, the middle slide shows our minimum standard for landscaping along 5490 and Highlands Loop Road. As you can see, the detention pond is also landscaping, so it hopefully will look like an attractive feature on the corner and not, as we have some examples in this city and other cities, of just a kind of an open pit that gets overgrown by weeds. And all of these will be maintained by the Homeowners Association. And the private road landscaping, the trees are a little less dense at 1 per 40 feet in the development. And finally, along Highlands Loop Road and 5490, there's a requirement for a masonry wall because it is a public street. And then along the private street, I think they call it Street A, that goes from north to south at the very far left of the illustration in the center. It's a private street. There will be vinyl fencing that will match. There's, the planning commission, you could require different fencing, but I believe that this meets the minimum standard of the ordinance for fencing. with that, there are some recommended conditions. There are some red lines that were given to the applicant and they need to be corrected before they apply for final plat approval. This is just preliminary. Again, as the planning commission is aware, the preliminary approval will remain valid for 1 year. So they have 1 year to apply for final approval. And, and then 3, 4, and 5 all meet our minimum requirements. They have to meet the subdivision requirements, zoning requirements, as well as water and sewer availability. As the planning commission can read in their staff report on criteria C, our utilities department has determined that there is adequate water and sewer available for this development, as well as adequate storm drain capacity for the development. Water and sewer are based upon zoning. And so that is generally how they determine the availability of water and sewer is based upon the R320 zone. We also go through many, many rounds of development pre-application where we determine the availability of utilities as well as the application itself. The availability of utilities, water and sewer and storm drain is also vetted at the zone change. Both when it was zoned R320 and when it was rezoned, removing the senior housing overlay. So with that, staff feels that this development meets the ordinance of West Jordan City and recommends that the planning commission approve this subdivision. Do you have any questions for me?
Questions for staff? No, thank you. All right, this has been noticed as a public hearing. So this particular agenda item, subdivision plat, is an administrative application. That means the city council has approved regulations for this type of application in advance of the application being submitted. So it's the duty of the planning commission as the decision maker to determine if the applicable subdivision regulations have been met. The city staff, including planners, engineers, fire marshals, real property administrator, et cetera, have prepared a staff report for the planning commission, and that is available to the public within the on the city's website. Let's see, the subdivision agenda item has some specific issues regarding an internal private street system, 2 connections to public streets, and an emergency turnaround. There's also some shared access driveways. If an appeal is filed regarding the planning commission's decision tonight, the appeal should be filed with the zoning administrator and the board of adjustment at the city offices within 15 days of the planning commission's decision. But with that, we will turn the time over to the public. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. If you're online, feel free to raise your hand. If you're here, welcome to come up and address us for that time period.
We're all looking at one.
Yeah.
We have 2 public.
All right, well, hearing none, we will close the planning or the public hearing. Close the public hearing, bring us back to the planning commission for further discussion or a motion. Commissioner Richardson.
Yeah, this is not relevant, but I kind of just want to know right now if I could. It says that that this could be appealed. I was trying to get information on appealing, but I'm not, I mean, I think this is fine. I'm gonna vote yes on this. It's not a problem. But what is the cost to appeal, let's say?
$1,250.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought it was kind of high, just kind of steep but that's okay. I
Yeah, that's-
understand.
That's all set by the city council. I won't disagree with you. It's high, but
Okay.
nothing to do about it, but hand them an invoice.
Yeah.
Commissioner Quinney.
Anybody else have anything they want to add? Okay, I'm gonna make the motion. I move the planning commission to approve the preliminary major subdivision plat for Highlands Landing residential subdivision located at 5490 West Highlands Loop Road, and approve the private streets that serve this development with the conditions and requirements of approval listed in this report.
Commissioner Wynn.
Second.
Motion from Commissioner Quinny, second from Commissioner Wynn. Further discussion on the motion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Commissioner Thomas,
I will make a motion to adjourn.
we are adjourned.
I agree. I was thinking the same.